Your soulmate saying, "I can't keep this secret any longer, you deserve to know everything." Something refused to stay hidden tonight. Not because anyone planned to reveal it, but because silence had finally become heavier than the truth itself. Imagine someone standing in the glow of a street lamp long after everyone else has gone home, holding a message they've rewritten 100 times, whispering the same sentence over and over, "I can't keep this secret any longer." You deserve to know everything. The strange part isn't that those words were spoken. The strange part is why they were held back for so long. And before this story reaches its turning point, there's one small detail almost everyone misses. The evening looked ordinary from the outside. Cars rolled past. Windows reflected the fading sunset. Conversations drifted through cafes as if nothing extraordinary was unfolding. Yet somewhere in that familiar world, your soulmate sat completely still, staring at an old photograph that somehow carried more questions than answers. Their fingers rested against the edge of the picture, not because they were searching for memories, but because they were gathering the courage to face one impossible realization. They had convinced themselves that protecting you meant protecting the secret. But today something shifted. Someone asked a simple question they couldn't escape. If they knew the whole story, would they really walk away? That single sentence echoed louder than any noise around them. Stay with this, because what happened after that question changed the direction of everything. Without warning, they opened a notebook they hadn't touched in months. Inside were unfinished letters, crossed-out confessions, and words abandoned halfway through because honesty had always felt riskier than silence. Yet tonight felt different. Every erased sentence suddenly demanded to be completed. Every unfinished thought wanted another chance. They remembered moments that once seemed too small to matter, the way your laughter softened tense conversations, the patience you showed when no explanation was offered, the quiet understanding in your eyes whenever life became complicated. Those memories didn't accuse them. They invited them to stop hiding. For the first time, they realized the greatest distance between two people isn't measured in miles. It's measured in truths left unspoken. And that realization brought a calm they had never experienced before. Then something unexpected happened. A message appeared on their phone, not from you, but from someone who unknowingly unlocked the final piece of the puzzle. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. It was just one ordinary sentence that reminded them how quickly opportunities disappear when fear keeps making the decisions. They smiled, but it wasn't the smile of someone who had all the answers. It was the smile of someone who had finally stopped running from the question. They stood, slipped the old photograph back into the notebook, and quietly whispered, "No more hiding." At that exact moment, the secret was no longer a burden. It became a promise waiting to be fulfilled. But here's what makes this story unforgettable. The secret they were preparing to reveal wasn't about changing who you are. It was about revealing how deeply your presence had already changed them, and the very first words of that confession are closer than you think. The first words almost escaped before they could be stopped. A quiet breath filled the room, followed by a silence that somehow carried more meaning than any speech ever could. They looked at the glowing screen one more time, knowing there would be no deleting this message once it was sent. Then they finally admitted what had been locked inside for far too long. "I can't keep this secret any longer," you deserve to know everything. But the secret wasn't a shocking betrayal or a dramatic twist. It was something far more powerful. They confessed that every time they tried to move forward without you, life quietly pulled them back to the same place. Every new conversation reminded them of one you once shared. Every celebration somehow felt incomplete because the person they truly wanted to tell wasn't there. They had spent months pretending they were protecting both of you by remaining silent, when in reality they were only protecting themselves from the possibility of hearing an answer they weren't ready for. The fear had never been about losing you. The fear was discovering how important you had already become. Before this story moves another step, there's one detail still hidden beneath those words, and once it comes into the light, everything begins to make perfect sense. As they continued writing, memories surfaced with remarkable clarity. They remembered tiny moments most people would have forgotten. The unexpected smile that appeared when your name entered a conversation, the strange comfort they felt after reading messages they never answered immediately because they wanted to choose every word carefully, the quiet excitement that arrived whenever they imagined what life could look like if honesty finally replaced hesitation. Then another realization settled over them. The secret wasn't created in a single day. It had been growing quietly through hundreds of unnoticed moments, each one adding another reason they could no longer stay silent. Looking out through the window, they watched strangers crossing the street, each carrying stories no one else could see, and suddenly understood that everyone reaches a moment when truth becomes lighter than pretending. That moment had arrived for them. Their shoulders relaxed. Their expression softened. For the first time in a long while, they weren't rehearsing excuses. They were preparing for authenticity. If this story has touched something inside you so far, share where you're watching from in the comments and let someone else experience this journey with you. There's still another layer waiting to unfold, and the next few moments reveal why this confession couldn't have happened any earlier. They reached into a drawer and unfolded one final piece of paper that had never been meant for anyone else's eyes. It wasn't a goodbye letter. It wasn't even a love letter. It was a promise they had once written to themselves, that if they ever found someone who inspired them to become more honest, more patient, and more fearless, they would never allow fear to steal that connection again. Reading those words now felt almost unbelievable because they finally recognized whose presence had inspired them to write that promise in the first place. Suddenly every delay, every unanswered question, every quiet pause, and every unfinished conversation fit together like pieces of a picture that had always been waiting to be completed. Their hand hovered over the send button, not with uncertainty this time, but with quiet confidence. They smiled, whispered, "It's finally time," and pressed it. Somewhere beyond that single moment, a new chapter had already begun to unfold. Yet the message they had just sent contained one final sentence they had never spoken aloud before, a sentence so personal, so unexpected, that once you hear it, you'll understand why they believed only you deserved to know the entire truth. The reply did not arrive immediately, and strangely, that silence no longer frightened them. Instead, it felt meaningful, almost as if time itself had slowed down to make room for something important. They walked outside beneath a sky painted with the last colors of dusk, carrying a calm they hadn't felt in years. For the first time, there was nothing left to rehearse, nothing left to hide behind, and no carefully crafted version of themselves to protect. They had finally placed the truth where it belonged, in your hands. Then the phone vibrated. Just once. They didn't rush to open it. They closed their eyes, smiled softly, and took one deep breath before looking down. Your message wasn't long, but every word carried extraordinary weight. You hadn't asked why it took so long. You hadn't questioned the silence or counted the missed opportunities. Instead, you responded with kindness that completely caught them off guard. That unexpected grace unraveled every wall they had spent so much time building. In that instant, they understood something they had overlooked for far too long: real connections are not measured by perfect timing, but by the courage to finally be genuine. Still, there was one sentence they hadn't revealed yet, one memory they had guarded more carefully than anything else. And once that memory surfaced, the meaning of every strange coincidence between you would become impossible to ignore. A quiet rain began to fall, turning the streets into mirrors that reflected city lights like scattered pieces of a dream. Instead of rushing home, they wandered through familiar places that suddenly looked completely different. The little coffee shop where they had once imagined running into you. The bookstore where they almost bought a novel simply because it reminded them of a conversation you shared. The park bench where they had spent nearly an hour wondering whether destiny was simply another word for courage that arrives too late. Every location carried an invisible thread leading back to you. It wasn't because you had been there with them every time. It was because your influence had quietly shaped the way they experienced ordinary life. The secret they had carried wasn't just hidden in words. It was woven into countless unnoticed moments that had slowly transformed who they were becoming. Looking around, they realized that the world hadn't changed overnight. Their perspective had. And once perspective changes, familiar places begin telling completely different stories. Before this journey moves forward, pause for just a moment and ask yourself how many beautiful truths are waiting behind conversations that almost happened but never did. The answer might be closer than you think. Then came the moment they had imagined countless times but never believed would actually arrive. They opened an old voice recording stored deep inside their phone, one they had created on a restless night when emotions felt too overwhelming to put into a message. Their voice sounded uncertain then, almost hesitant, yet every sentence pointed toward the same undeniable truth. "If you ever hear this," the recording whispered, "I hope you'll know that meeting you changed more than my plans. It changed the person I wanted to become." Hearing those words again filled them with quiet amazement because they no longer sounded like the wish of someone afraid. They sounded like the promise of someone finally ready to live honestly. Without hesitation, they attached the recording to one final message and watched it begin its journey toward you. Somewhere between the sound of falling rain and the glow of distant streetlights, they realized the greatest secret had never been hidden from you at all. It had been hidden from themselves. But the recording contained one final confession they had never written anywhere else, a single heartfelt sentence that would leave both of you staring at the screen in complete silence, knowing that after tonight, nothing between your hearts could ever feel quite the same again. The voice recording reached you in the quietest part of the evening. No dramatic music. No grand announcement. Just the gentle sound of someone finally speaking without fear. As the recording played, every pause carried meaning, every breath revealed sincerity, and every sentence felt as though it had been waiting for this exact moment. They admitted they had imagined dozens of different futures, but in every single one, one truth remained unchanged. You were the person they wished they had trusted sooner. They confessed that the biggest secret was never a hidden event or an untold story. It was the fact that your belief in them had quietly transformed their confidence long before they ever admitted it aloud. They had become stronger because they imagined the kind of person you deserved. They had become kinder because they remembered the compassion you naturally showed others. And they had become more honest because pretending no longer felt worthy of the connection they hoped to build with you. There was still one final layer beneath those words, though. It wasn't written in the recording. It was hidden inside a decision they had already made before pressing send, a decision that would shape everything that happened next. Hours passed, yet neither of you rushed the conversation. Instead, the silence between each message became surprisingly comforting, almost like two people watching the same sunrise from different places while knowing they were sharing the exact same moment. One thoughtful reply led to another, and the walls built from uncertainty slowly disappeared. Then they revealed something they had never told anyone before. They had kept a small collection of ordinary reminders that always brought your memory back. A receipt from a cafe where your conversation inspired them to dream bigger, a pressed autumn leaf collected after a walk that unexpectedly reminded them of your laughter, and a handwritten note containing a quote that encouraged them on difficult days because it sounded exactly like something you would say. None of those keepsakes were valuable on their own. Together, however, they told a story they had been too afraid to speak. If this journey has made you smile even once, consider sharing it with someone who believes meaningful stories still exist, and let me know in the comments what moment has touched you the most. Because what happened next wasn't about looking backward anymore, it was about stepping confidently into something completely new. The following morning arrived with a feeling neither of you had expected. It wasn't excitement alone, and it certainly wasn't relief. It was quiet certainty. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself because it already knows where it belongs. They looked out the window as the first rays of sunlight stretched across the streets, realizing that the secret they had protected for so long had finally become the foundation for something real. No masks. No unanswered questions. No carefully guarded distance. Only honesty, hope, and the willingness to discover what could happen when two hearts choose openness over fear. Then, just before putting the phone away, they typed one final message, simple, genuine, and impossible to misunderstand. From this moment forward, I don't want you wondering how I feel. I want you to experience it through everything I do. They smiled as they sent it, unaware that your response was already on its way, carrying one beautiful surprise that neither of you could have predicted, a surprise that would make the journey ahead even more unforgettable. Morning unfolded with a quiet sense of possibility that neither of you could explain. The world looked exactly the same, yet everything felt different because the truth was finally out in the open. They no longer checked their phone with nervous anticipation. Instead, they carried it with peaceful confidence, knowing that whatever happened next would be built on honesty rather than uncertainty. Then your reply arrived. It wasn't filled with dramatic declarations or impossible promises. It was beautifully simple. You thanked them for choosing courage instead of silence and admitted that genuine honesty is far more meaningful than perfect timing. Those words stayed with them long after the screen went dark. They realized that the greatest gift wasn't hearing the answer they hoped for, it was discovering that authenticity creates a connection stronger than imagination ever could. As they walked through the city, familiar faces, passing conversations, and ordinary moments suddenly seemed brighter, as though the weight they had carried for so long had quietly disappeared. But before this story reaches its final destination, there's one remarkable detail still waiting to be revealed, and it explains why this confession happened on this exact day instead of months before. Later that afternoon, they found themselves returning to the place where they had first promised they would eventually tell you everything. It wasn't a famous landmark or a breathtaking destination. It was simply a peaceful corner where life slowed down enough for important thoughts to be heard. Sitting there once again, they smiled as they noticed something they had overlooked during every previous visit. The bench faced the sunrise, not the sunset. Somehow that small detail became the perfect symbol of everything they had learned. Their story had never been about looking back with regret. It had always been preparing them to face the future with hope. They closed the notebook that had once been filled with unfinished confessions and, instead of adding another page, gently tucked it away. Its purpose had been fulfilled. If this journey has reminded you that honesty can transform even the quietest moments, share this story with someone who believes meaningful connections still matter, and tell me in the comments which moment stayed with you the longest. Sometimes a single act of courage inspires countless others to stop hiding their own truth. As the evening sky filled with warm colors once more, they looked toward the horizon and realized that the secret had never truly been the destination. It had simply been the doorway leading both of you toward something far more meaningful. Every unanswered question, every delayed conversation, every moment of hesitation had quietly shaped the people you had become. Now there was no need to wonder what might have happened if someone had spoken sooner. The future was no longer waiting for perfect circumstances, it had already begun the moment honesty took its first step. They picked up their phone one last time that day and read your latest message again, smiling a little wider with every word. It ended with a sentence they knew they would never forget: "Now that we know the truth, let's stop imagining what could be and start creating memories we'll never have to hide." Standing there beneath the fading light, they understood that some stories don't end with a confession. They truly begin because of it. And just beyond this beautiful chapter, an unexpected invitation was already making its way toward both of you, one that would transform a heartfelt conversation into the unforgettable beginning of a brand new adventure together.